Hello, hiya. I'm going to presume that you don't know me. So my name's Aaron Liddard. I'm sat right now in my studio in Epping, which is on the edge of London. And I've been down here, been based in London for about 20 years, just come up 20 years. So yeah, my name's Aaron Liddard, and here I am. I'm a saxophonist and I'm a composer, and I suppose as well musical director and arranger. I do lots of hats really, but I'm best known as a sax player. And I think I've spent the last, certainly 19 years of my 20 years in London really on a serial kind of apprenticeship, learning about lots of different genres from lots of different artists, I think. And then in the last year, I've kind of started to make that pivot back to probably the reasons that I moved to London, which is to play my own music. So I released this album, Nylon Man, last October, and that's been really great experience, to be honest. That's the main reason I'm on. But you know, what am I mainly known for? I'm mainly known as being the sax player with Amy Winehouse, which I did for about a year, and did the whole gamut of that. I got it at a really good time. I got to work with her, you know, when she's really at the apex of her life, of her career, really. She is relatively clean at the time. It was when she was first put in Back to Black out. So we did loads of rehearsals, a couple of tours, loads of TV work, some recording, some video recording. I'm on the rehab video. You can go and look at that. If you go and look at rehab video on YouTube and look at the guy in a kind of grey outfit with a baritone sax, you'll see me with shorter hair. It's grown a bit since. And then I've been fortunate. I mean, when I moved to London, I had three main aims. I wanted to become a better sax player. I really felt that I needed to be in a much more challenging environment to become a better musician. And I was at the time pretty clueless about how the industry ran, and I was keen to get that sorted out. And also just didn't have any credibility outside of I was in Manchester, and I was kind of big news in Manchester. People would stop me on the street, or I was buying my groceries, people would go, "Hey, aren't you that sax player? Don't you run that night?" Which is cool, but then I'd go 5 miles away and no one had heard of me. So I just didn't have my game down at all. And I came down to London really to get to get all that down really. And I think in the 90s, it's taken a while. It's been a hard slog to go from, completely back to the ground up. But I think I've done okay at that. Apart from Amy, I've worked with Bob Geldof from the Boomtown Rats. I played their comeback tour after 30 years off. I've done a couple of albums with them and a few shows. Fantastic British artist, Beverly Knight. And probably the biggest gig for me, although I wasn't in the main band, but with Prince. Prince came to London for a couple of months, and we ended up being involved with his show. And that was... And Maceo as well. That was crazy. And the keyboard player that night said, "Aaron, we should give up now, because you're only as good as your last gig, and we just played with Prince. We should give up." I didn't give up, but it kind of liberated me quite a lot. Generally I find that I've been fortunate to play with a lot of American musicians from lots of different genres. And I find it liberating. You guys have got it happening. It's nice. So other artists that I've kind of worked with, notable, like Norman Connors and Michael Henderson. Back in the 70s, they had a band called the Starship Orchestra, and we had a show in London. So I was the musical director for the Starship Orchestra. I transcribed 30 of their tunes, which are all recorded with 50-piece orchestras, and I reduced it down to a 13-piece band. And Norman Connors was blown away. He couldn't believe that I'd managed to make an English band of 13 people sound pretty much the same as they had from 60 people in the studio. So yeah, I've been fortunate to investigate gospel and hip hop and blues before, you know, in the before times. I was on tour with an American blues artist called Sugar Ray Rayford. I've played with Walter Trout. I've just recorded for Walter Trout, rather. So I've kind of had a lot of good experiences around different genres, which has been really beneficial, really informative. So yeah, and then I think actually talking about the before times, I was ready to release my album in 2020, and I was on the crux of putting down the deposit at a venue to play the launch show, and something didn't quite feel right, and I held off. And I'm so glad I did, because I would have lost that deposit, because a week later we went into lockdown. And having had a couple of years forced to stay at home and change everything, has obviously been really tough for so many of us, especially in our industry. I've lost so much of the momentum that I built up as a sideman. But you know, and you know, people have lost a lot of, right? We all agree, right? That people have lost a lot. So we shouldn't. It's hard to be grateful for something that's caused that. But then I guess we had to turn a hand and make the best of the scenario. And back in 2018, I think I visited 26 countries, a lot of them many times, with my own band and with two other bands I was touring with. And 2019 was similar. And so when 2020 happened, I think I'd done about 5 countries, and then we got told to stay home. And it was kind of refreshing to be, you know, to wake up in the same bed for a week and stay in one place on the planet for a while. So it's actually quite good for me. I got very poorly. I got COVID early on, and then I got long COVID, and fortunately for me, a clinical nutritionist came into my life, and I've not looked back. So, you know, I've been very fortunate in that way. And then I had this bit of time to focus on all the other stuff, the aggregators, the speaking to labels, getting my marketing team together, booking a tour. So it's kind of having that enforced downtime has given me a chance to launch the album in 2022 with more conviction and more inclusion, I guess. So I've sort of been fortunate, and I know that a heck of a lot of us started writing in that lockdown. Totally right thing to do, I think. But this album I started in 2010, and so it's been a 12-year work in progress. Nylon Man, there it is, Nylon Man, and it is, yeah, it's I toyed with not putting it on Spotify for a long time, and then I just thought, you know what, the music should not have barriers in the way. And whilst I politically disagree with what Spotify does, ultimately my purpose is to honour the music, and the music should come through me and get heard anywhere it possibly can. So yeah, you can listen to Nylon Man anywhere, any way you like. You can listen on Bandcamp. Bandcamp's a good place to go. I think that's the most ethical place. You can hear a few bits on via my website, but of course you can hear it anywhere else as well. So yeah, I launched this last year, and it's gone down pretty well. I mean, it's obviously jazz. I don't know about in the States. Here, jazz is very niche, so it's kind of hard to It's hard to get that much purchase, but I got the front cover of a proper music magazine from the album. This is called Blues and Soul. It's a magazine that's been celebrating music of black origin since 1967. And Aretha Franklin's been on the cover, Nina Simone, Stevie Wonder, Chuck Berry, Lionel Richie, Amy Winehouse, Beverly Knight. And I've done some research, and in all those 56 years, I'm only the third sax player to go on the cover. So I'm really, really happy about that. Really happy to. It's the first time I've been on the cover of a magazine. It's like I'm pretty much blown away. And I don't know whether it's a good thing or not that it's not a jazz magazine. It's Blues and Soul. It's music of black origin magazine. But I think that I can definitely consider myself to be a jazz musician, and my interpret, rabbit hole, isn't it, to talk about what you think jazz is. But I kind of think that we're blessed to have an entire art form which is inclusive. I think that we have genres within our art form which are exclusive, and I think that genres are defined by their exclusions. But then we have this entire art form which is inclusive, and I think that jazz musicians over the decades have sort of just welcomed in everything that's around and sort of worked with that. And so definitely my album has done that. I've kind of been inspired by all different things, and I think that the jazz comes in when we stretch away from the composition. I think that's what jazz is that we start with a composition, whether it's, Tin Pan Alley or the Great American Songbook or some hip hop or some funk or some Latin jazz, whatever it is that we start with. I think the jazz is when we stretch away from it and give people an experience. I don't think jazz is swing per se, but I do think that swing is a genre of jazz. So anyway, that's a little bit about where we're coming from. And it's been really well received, the album. I've had reviews with quite a few of the notable jazz outlets over here, and also quite a few outlets that are not jazz. So like that, the last review came from a heavy metal magazine. So I'm really touched by that, to be honest. I think, as the author wrote, for a heavy metalhead to review a jazz album, it's got to be special. And she said, as it is. So that's pretty awesome. So look, straight away, God, I've listened to it at some point. In an ideal world, let's face it, what I've learned from self-releasing is the hardest thing is to get people to listen. So, I've even had people buy the album but not listen to it, and then they see a video I put up and they go, "Oh, that's really nice tune. Have you got any more like that?" I'm like, yeah, on the album that you bought. So, but if you're the kind of person that listens to albums, if you can put yourself aside kind of 74 minutes and get a comfy seat, sit down and listen to it, I think it'll be a rewarding experience. And what's come back from fellow musicians and from critics is that it's wildly ear-opening and it's inspiring and uplifting and balancing, and a strange one I wasn't expecting, which I welcome. If it connects with anyone in any way, I welcome it. It's helped me with my bereavement. And of course, very sadly, there's been a lot of bereavements in the last couple of years. And I think music should be of its time. I feel more of a connection to music when it's been written recently, or if you know, if I'm in the room with the composer. And it's a strange phenomenon that at least 3 people have told me that listening to the album really helped them process their bereavement. Someone came up after a gig and said, "Thank you so much. This is the first time I've enjoyed myself since my partner died and not felt guilty. That's just, thank you so much." I had someone else get in touch and say, I've just been focusing on work for so long, and I listened to your album and I just cried and cried. There was one tune, I just kept it on repeat, and I cried and cried. And now I feel that I've done that bereavement that I owed for my friend. And so thank you so much for giving me that music, that accompaniment. So, you know, I don't want people to cry to my music, but if I do hope that at its best, music is obviously an emotional and hopefully a spiritual experience. And I know that the music for me, I do feel that I was inspired to write it. It's definitely not a bunch of demonstrations of my sax playing for the sake of it. It's a bunch of songs that sort of came to me without any kind of pre thoughts of my own. They just sort of appeared, and I did my best to realize them, and then put sax on them if I felt they needed it. I kind of think like a producer does, really, or I don't know, like a conductor maybe, or a composer. For my next album, I want to focus more on myself as a saxophonist, but for this album, I just wanted to reproduce the ideas, and yeah. So on that tip, I don't think I'm a good composer. I don't think that I can kind of write to order really well at all. I think that I'm a really good transcriber. And I think that Norman Connors agreed with that, the way that I interpreted their tunes. And I think that I occasionally get kind of, you know, these ideas going to my head. And I'm like, that's odd. That's really odd, but I like it. And so when that happens, I do my best to sit on the piano, or even, you know, go on the computer and step right it into there, or I get my phone out and get the dictaphone on and sings parts into it and just try to record it in any way. Everything on this album, all 12 tracks, came that way. I could go through the whole album and tell you where I was and what was going on at the time when the seed idea came. And then I'm very fortunate to have musicians around me who are called to come and jam, and I think that that's such an important part of our life, right? And so we'll jam, and I'll say, "I've got this idea. Can we try it?" I'm like, okay. And yeah, it starts in 3/4, and then it goes to 6/8, and then there's a little bit later, and I think it's in 19/8, but I'm not sure. And they're like, okay, but I think it works. Okay, and they kind of give it a best shot, and then if it works, we sort of extends from there. I kind of like, there's this nice concept that when you're thinking of music, you might get a little thread pops down, and if you tug on it, that's it, or you just get this little idea. But if you tease on it, then a bit more comes, and if you tease on it, then the whole blanket comes, and you get the whole idea. I kind of like that concept. I really do believe that music, at least some music, exists or is alive on some kind of plane, maybe on a different dimension. And I believe that musicians and composers particularly have some kind of connection to that dimension. I think that the more that we focus on, when we get an idea, when the inspiration pixie arrives and says, "Here you go, Aaron, here's an idea," I think that if we turn that into reality, then our beacon in there, you know, in that spiritual world, is a little bit brighter. and then it might happen again. So I always, when I get an idea, I'm very, very, very serious about honouring it. And I think Prince is a great idea, a great icon for that. Prince would write, arrange, record, mix and master a song a day, didn't he? Okay, so he's an incredible songwriter, but also he was blessed with ideas. Yeah, so that's kind of my process anyway. Okay, so let's talk about the title, Nylon Man. It's named after the three cities that really have inspired me the most, and musically. Guess what they are? New York, London, Manchester. I spent 10 years living in Manchester, and I've spent 20 years living in London, and I've been blessed to pass through New York many times, and been blessed to be welcomed in to jam with people and get involved with different bits and bobs over the time. So I've really had great, kind of feel like I've got a bit of a musical family in New York. And I think from the perspective of America, you think London, London, Manchester, are they much different? And I think they are. I think musically, London and Manchester are about as far apart as New York and LA. There's very much a different vibe. Yeah, so that's how the name Nylon Man came about. It's the three cities that have really inspired me most. And I think this album is, there's so many different genres. There's some hip hop, there's some math rock, there's a little bit of swing, there's a full-blown ballad that's just vocals and piano, there's fast-paced Latin jazz, there's bossa nova, there's funk, there's soul, and so I just, whatever I've heard, I've reproduced, and it's been a massive undertaking. There's 42 musicians on this album, 12 drummers, and oftentimes there's more than one drummer on a track. So we had to really experiment a lot in the studio, and that's partly why it took so long, because I knew what I heard, but I didn't know how to achieve it, and my engineers didn't really know what I heard and also didn't know how to achieve it, and my musicians got to know what I heard but didn't really get the whole process maybe. So it was very much a trial and error approach in the studio, and I basically worked the most well-paid gigs I could for the whole time in order to afford 1 day a month in the studio, which was incredibly frustrating, but also gave me plenty of reflection time to make the right decisions and to keep listening with fresh ears. And I'm really happy with the results. I think that the sound quality is amazing, the performance is amazing. I think it's really quite I think the experience of listening to 42 incredible musicians, there's 5 singers on the album, all of which are incredible, including your own Carleen Anderson. Hearing 42 artists really give their all in the time of 74 minutes itself is quite an enriching experience, I think. And then added to that it goes in directions that you're really not expecting. There's that classic Sidney Balliet quote that jazz is the sound of surprise. And a journalist here from the BBC said, I think this album is the sound of surprise, which I that's definitely a compliment in my eyes. So yeah, that's what Nylon Man's about. Now, let's just cover a little bit about my experiences where I started jazz. What were my first experiences of jazz? So at school, I was always teacher's pet when it came to music. But I was quite a poorly kid, so I wasn't very good at anything else really. Maths I was, but music was the one that I really connected. And from my background, you don't really get to meet a committed lifelong musician outside of the establishment, which is school. I'm always kind of jealous when I work with American gospel musicians who have been playing the Hammond organ since they were 2 years old, because they showed an interest and someone got them sit on their knee, you know. And I remember playing in a gospel group one time with a drummer that was 4 years old and he was killing it. I didn't have it for, in our society, you quite often don't meet someone outside of an institution that's a really lifelong committed musician until you're an adult, crazily. So I was very fortunate when I turned 14 that I got the option to start an instrument, and I'd be loaned the instrument for free, and I'd have lessons for free. And being from a lower middle class family, I had the options of piano lessons, but not to have this really zany, expensive instrument, just to see if I could try it. So I chose the sax. And fortunately, my teacher, Brian Philby, was a retired bebopper, jazzer that used to play in Soho. So he taught me all this, you know, his first time that I had someone saying, I want to teach you how to play melody and how to sail a song and how to recognize the notes that you don't need to play, because once the audience knows what you're going to play, you don't need to play them. That's kind of blew my mind in a good way. And just at the same time, I had someone as my teacher that you guys might know now. He's based in New York. He's now called Dr. Charlie Beale, and he is director of the New York Gay Choir and has won loads of awards. And when I was 14, he was my music teacher. And so I had a classical composer on one side as a teacher, and then Mr. Beale on the other side telling me that jazz was legit as well, which was wonderful. And then about a year later, a local musician started running a little jazz club in the shed next to the pub. And I was too young to go to the pub, but because it was in the shed, I could go to that. So I'd go down and buy an orange juice and a lemonade, mix them together, and nurse that all night and absolutely love it. And after a while, they kind of got wind that I was a sax player, and they'd say, well, you know, come and play. And it was so rewarding having that experience of being, you know, incredible, really, getting to play in a real jazz club, age 14, with real seasoned jazz musicians. There's a chap that came through, a double bass player called Mick Hutton. And I remember he was telling me about time, and he said that it's not just a click, it's an infinity. And he said, imagine a pendulum, and that when it's at the bottom, that's the beat, and between there and back there is infinity, and anything can happen, and you can do anything you like. You don't have to play crotchets or quavers or triplets. You can do anything you like. And that definitely, I think that's stuck with me. If you go and listen to a track called Cat Food, and you'll hear how that's affected me. Actually, while you're listening to Cat Food, put it on headphones, because you'll have a Cuban rhythm section on one side and a Brit funk rhythm section on the other side. And it's quite a crazy experience. I would love to speak about the album, but I've kind of spoken quite a lot, so I'd love you to just have a listen to it. I'm going to see if there's any comments. I don't know how I can do that. Oh, I can't see the comments bit at the moment, so I'll have to look after. But if you make any comments, I'll come and reply separately, maybe. Couple of thank yous I want to say. I want to thank Gail Boyd for giving me access to this incredible platform. Thank you so much. It can be, you know, playing this music outside the States can feel a bit distant sometimes. And so it's really lovely of you to welcome me onto this fantastic platform. And I want to thank Scott Thompson for introducing me to Gail as well. Okay, what have I got? Anything else to say? Gigs coming up, yeah. So to celebrate my 20th year in London, I'm doing my first date in Ronnie Scott's, the world famous Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club. and that's going to be on Friday and Saturday, 9th and 10th of June. We're doing, for local guys, it's a late set. We start at 11 o'clock. Other dates I've got is this Saturday, the 25th of March, we're at the Verdict Jazz Club in Brighton. Sunday, the 30th of April, which incidentally is International Jazz Day, I'm at the Ribble Valley Jazz Festival. And then on Tuesday, the 9th of May, I'm at Norwich Jazz Club. So they're the gigs coming up. The music's everywhere. Please have a listen to it. Go to my website, check me out. Please get in touch. And been real pleasure speaking to you. So I look forward to seeing you all again. Cheers. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.